Welcome back, 16 lectures, that's pretty good. Okay, so this is a two-parter. We're going to break realism into two different sections. You can see that in the timeline that you were used to looking at, we're looking at a little bit before 1850 to just after 1870 for this period of painting. And here are some historical events that shaped kind of what we're going to be looking at today. We talked about photography already, and we did a whole long thing about the daguerreotype. And I'd mentioned that the Daguerre wasn't the first one to create photography. He was just the first one to create like a practical process. You can see also there's Haussmann rebuilding Paris from 1853 to 1870, the subject of the last lecture. This lecture is about a specific painting style, but it really was informed by all these things that happened in 1848. So let's get into a few of those just so you know what I'm talking about. The first one is the February Revolution. It's also called the French Revolution of 1848. And riots had been breaking out in Paris for years because of economic hardship and the lack of social needs being met, or in other words, people were sick and starving and the government wasn't doing anything about it. The February Revolution established the principle of right to work, and it expanded the electoral franchise, or who was able to vote. Because before this, only about 1% of the population were allowed to vote, and of course those were the richest people. In that same year, because of the February Revolution, there was an election in France, and Napoleon III, who we discussed a little bit when we talked about Haussmann, was elected president, and he served from 1848 to 1852, and he won because of his support from the peasant class that had this newly earned right to vote. However, the constitution of this new republic had term limits, and he couldn't be reelected, but he didn't want to give up power, so of course he seized power in 1851 and called himself Emperor of the French from 1852 to 1870. So this thing that seemed to start off really positively ended in this new monarchy or empire. He founded the Second French Empire, and he was the emperor until the French army was defeated and he was captured by the Prussians in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, which informs some art as well. And finally, there were a lot of revolutionary philosophical ideas that were floating around in the world at this time. And probably the most revolutionary of them was Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto. And if you don't know what that is, it's basically a call to arms of the workers of the world to unite. In a nutshell, it is that class struggles are the motivating force behind all historical developments. And in this new era of industrialization, the proletariat, or the workers, are going to lead a revolution. And because they're not landowners and there's no this redistribution of wealth to the next ruling class, they don't have any land of their own, they don't have any power. So when the workers do unite and lead, they will gain control of everything. They will destroy the ownership of private property, and the class system will disappear. So there won't be the bourgeoisie or the peasants or the landed nobles. All of that stuff goes away because the workers are the ones that rule over everything. So that's the sort of the idea behind the Communist Manifesto in very simplified terms. So that idea of the lower classes being important in the election of Napoleon III, or in the eyes of these revolutionary philosophers, it kind of informs the work that we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be looking at paintings by Courbet, Millet, Manet, and even Whistler, who everybody knows Whistler's mother, the woman in the rocking chair. But he made many other important paintings besides that. And then some paintings that we've already looked at, but sort of are informative as well, is Liberty Leading the People by Delacroix, which was that seminal French Romanticism painting. And then Slave Ship by Turner, which was about abolishing slavery. And so there was this movement in art to embrace the forgotten or the left behind. And realism takes up that mantle without idealizing its subjects. No surprise, we're back in France, where we will be. I'm not sure we leave this place ever again in the rest of this class. So this is realism. It focused on everyday life and paid attention to precise detail. It lacked the idealization of its subject matter or romanticizing its subject matter. It was often focused on the margins of society. We'll see that today in the paintings, like the workers or the prostitutes or the people that are out in the fields after the sowing has been done. It's not really a united style so that like when you look at it you go, oh, everybody paints in the same way. But it's like a commitment to just paint honestly about what is happening in the modern world. And the painters are known as the avant-garde. And avant-garde is a military term which means like out in front or the front guard or the advanced troops. Basically, it's the people that go in first, risking their lives and scout things out. And these avant-garde artists turned their back on the classical past and they were trying to create an emblem of modernity in their art. They increased insistence on freedom of artistic expression. They increased dependence on art dealers and the gallery system, and there were less commissions than there had ever been. And so this is similar to that Dutch art market in which like painters were painting the world and they were hoping that buyers would buy it as opposed to getting the money first and then making the paintings. They were making the paintings hoping to sell them. Okay, this is Courbet's Stonebreakers, and this is the first time I think I've shown you a painting that doesn't exist anymore. This painting was destroyed, I think, during World War II. So we have a photograph of it, but we don't have the painting anymore. But it's really important in the history of realism. So, you know, it's kind of a good jumping off point. So Courbet was this bohemian, cool guy that left his middle class life and he decided to, you know, he's the epitome of that struggling artist that wanted to be real and paint something truthfully and honestly. Most of his subject matter deals with common people and their everyday lives, and these are subjects that would never have been painted by somebody in the academy, or else they would have been turned into allegories or pastoral scenes of, you know, like romanticizing these people. But Courbet was interested in showing like the unvarnished truth. He was especially interested in showing social injustice and pointing out how hard peasants had to work. And this fit in with his radical politics of kind of a communist belief system. Stonebreakers shows workers at the beginning and the ends of their lives. It's like this bracketing of the drudgery of the endless toil of a laborer's life. So that boy eventually will be that man. This is his life. He's gathering stones, he's breaking stones to help build roads. There's no hope of transcendence. We're on the ground with them. It's helping us to look at our own struggles. There's an equal emphasis on the texture of the rocks and the elements of like the hands and face. So Courbet is giving everything equal treatment in this. He's being truthful to the scene, and he's telling you that rocks and their texture are as important as the tears in the shirts, that are as important as the veins in the workers' hands. The other thing that's striking about this painting is that it is the size of a historical painting. So, you know, like that Liberty Leading the People was this giant canvas. And these two men, young and old, the canvas is the same size as that, which would not have been done. It was very strange to make just sort of a genre scene, if you will, be giant. And so I'm going to ask you, why? What is the significance of this being the same size as an academic historical painting? What is Courbet trying to say? So both the Stonebreakers and this painting, A Burial at Ornans, were shown at the Salon of 1850, and it was attacked by critics. This one especially because it depicts this mundane provincial funeral on this enormous scale. I don't usually put sizes of things, but I wanted you to see that this is 10 feet tall by 21 feet long. It is a crazy giant painting. Courbet is defying the academic rules. He's disrespecting compositional standards. There's no hierarchy. The painting records the funeral of his great uncle in this town, Ornans, And he wasn't trying to make the grief over dramatic. This is a realistic presentation of life in Ornon, of all its banal glory, I guess is the best way to say it. And people started to really love this style of painting. They kind of had enough of romanticism. And Courbet said that not only was this burial at Ornon a real thing that actually happened, it was the burial of romanticism itself. The other thing that's missing from this painting that we saw a lot of before was this suggestion of an afterlife. I mean, I'm showing you this painting from El Greco from 1586, so yes, that's a long time before, but in that painting, you have this whole elaborate scheme to get your eyes to go up to heaven, and then you see Jesus, and there's angels, and there's fallen devils, etc. Whatever. The whole thing is like this. On the ground, there is the earthly part, and then above there is the heavenly part. And besides that cross, from the clergy who look basically bored attending another funeral, there isn't really much prospect of the promise of the afterlife. Moving on from Courbet, we find Millet, and this is a painting called The Gleaners. And what's interesting is that Millet wasn't trying to reform society. He wasn't this political hothead like Courbet, but this painting is very political if you take the time to look at it. It basically shows these three women. They are the gleaners, and they're gathering leftover grain after the harvest. So what happens is there's a harvest, they take all of the good wheat away, and then they let all the poor people come in to do hours of back-breaking work to collect the remnants of the harvest just so they could make a single loaf of bread. This is a perfect example of realism because this is not romanticizing what a farmer does and how beautiful it is to work the land. This is, hey, there's a lot of poor people and they're barely scraping by, and this is the kind of work they have to do. As I said before, Millet denied that his work was like a social critique. And if you look at his other works, you might see this. It might have been just a bit of nostalgia for a more agrarian lifestyle. This painting, The Angelus, is about peasants stopping to work to pray in the fields. And this was a thing that happened. You would be working in the fields, and there's that church in the background, and the bells ring, and it tells you time to take a break and pray. The problem is, it was a period of time when people were looking at these lower classes and for the first time sort of seeing their value. So sometimes an artist can't control the way a society views their works. And Millet is a good example of that. Millet might have had something else in mind, but the time that he was painting in and the things that he was painting made everyone believe this is an honest depiction of peasants working in the fields. Okay, we're going to end this first part with Corot. He painted intimate scenes of rural France. This is like peaceful country life, which held appeal for Parisians that were sick of the crowded and chaotic metropolis. I mean, this is right in the middle of Haussmann's giant building project. So, they wanted to get out of the city and escape to the countryside. And we've seen this a little bit. I mean, you could almost relate this to Rococo paintings. But these aren't aristocrats that are frolicking and staying clean. These are just regular people that went and had like a picnic next to a lake. And there's no statues of Roman or Greek mythological figures. Corot believed in plein air studies, which basically means open air or outside studies. But he was not a painter who went outside to paint. He would make sketches and studies and take photos. He had a camera and he loved his camera, and then he would take that back to the studio and he would work on these paintings in a studio. One of my favorite things to do with a Corot painting is to look for like that little spot of red, because a lot of Corot paintings are outside in the green, lush forests, and that little spot of red sort of sets off the painting, and so I like to find the dot of red in Corot painting. And we're going to talk about Impressionism, and most of you know about Impressionism and have probably heard of Monet. But Monet basically said that Impressionism would not have happened if it wasn't for Corot in the first place. Okay, so let's leave it there, and then we're going to get to a guy that's going to blow your mind like Velasquez would have, Edward Manet, in the second part of this lecture.